How We Learn, Theory and Practice by Jay Sykes. At this point in our series, it would serve us well to zoom in on the process by which practice becomes theory and vice versa. Stalin said that theory is the experience of the working class movement in all countries taken in its general aspect. This is a good summation, but what does that really mean? We can learn a lot by reading books and articles or by watching videos that break down and explain things, but that's only part of how we learn. First and foremost, we learn through experience, through observation and participation, especially through our participation in the production of the fulfillment of our material needs. In his lecture on practice, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, Mao Zedong, breaks this process down into stages. First, there is the basic sense perception. We observe the world around us. Then, based on these observations, we form conceptual knowledge. In other words, we start to understand things based on their relationships to one another, and we are able to make judgments and inferences. Based on these judgments and inferences regarding the things we perceive in relation to one another, we act upon the world so as to shape the material world according to our practical needs. We can then turn a critical eye towards our experience, adjust our theory accordingly, and proceed again. According to Mao, if you want to know a certain thing or a certain class of things directly, you must personally participate in the practical struggle to change reality, to change that thing or class of things, for only thus can you come into contact with them as a phenomena. Only through personal participation in the practical struggle to change reality can you uncover the essence of that thing or class of things and comprehend them. This is true in the process of material production, class struggle, and scientific experiment. As we engage in this process, we make observations, judgments, and inferences. We sum up our experiences, draw lessons from those experiences, and then apply those lessons as we move forward. We can imagine our knowledge advancing in a spiral fashion, moving upward from theory to practice, and then to a more advanced theory, and then to a more advanced practice, ever up and onward. This is, essentially, the Marxist-Leninist theory of knowledge. In philosophy, this is called epistemology, which basically means an account of knowledge. The Marxist epistemology is this process of practice, theory, practice. We formulate a theory and test it in practice. Then we draw conclusions from that practice to improve our theory, and we test again. This process is never complete. There is no limit to what we can learn. Class struggle in particular has a huge influence on our thinking. Class consciousness, our knowledge of our place in society in relations to other social classes, is formed through class struggle. This is true of our class, the proletariat, and of the class of exploiters, the bourgeoisie. Through the class struggle, first against feudalism and then against the rising working class movement, the bourgeoisie has become ever more aware of their interest as a class and have developed theory and practice to achieve their class interests. Everyone who has participated in working class struggles knows this firsthand. Our thinking is defined by our class, stamped, as Mao says, by the brand of a class. It grounds our perspective and shapes our ideology. Until working and oppressed people become class conscious, the ideology of the dominant class, the ruling class, is left alone to shape their thinking and place its own limits on what is possible. The ruling class achieves this through culture, movies, media, education, news organs, and many other means at their disposal. Through class struggle and the fusion of Marxism with the movements of workers and oppressed nationalities, the hold of bourgeois ideology on the minds of the people is broken, and people begin to see the material reality of a world previously veiled by the fog of the false consciousness of bourgeois ideology. Marxist-Leninists are materialists rather than idealists. The idealists would have us believe that idealism means we care about high-minded things, while to be a materialist means we only care about material gain. But that's not what these terms mean philosophically. We care deeply about ideals like justice, but we know that if our ideals aren't made into a material reality through real material processes, then our ideals are worthless. So we start with material reality as the basis of our understanding, and apply that understanding to changing material reality. For example, idealists say that a just society is impossible because of human nature. But so-called human nature is an idealist concept meant to hide and obscure the true nature of reality. Human nature, they say, is greedy and self-serving at its core, but this is the ideology of capitalism describing itself. Human nature, thus described, isn't some fixed, unchangeable thing. This view of humanity is shaped by the material reality of capitalism, and it can and must be overcome as the society that shapes it is revolutionized. This is what we mean when we say that revolutionary theory is the experience of the working class movement in all countries taken in its general aspect. Marxist-Leninists the world over are continually gathering experience through practical struggle, using Marxist-Leninist theory to sum up those experiences and drawing lessons from them. Conditions are different everywhere, but by sharing our experience and summation, we can still use our judgment and inference to draw general lessons from those particular experiences that will prove useful as we work to apply Marxism-Leninism to our own conditions. In our next article, we'll look more closely at how this plays out in terms of revolutionary organizing and revolutionary organization by examining the process that the Chinese revolutionaries called the mass line.
This meditation was written and performed by Oliver Thorne and recorded with the help of Man Bros Media. Patreon.com/philosophytube is where you can support the show and find a list of the generous patrons who make it possible. This is a guided meditation on peace, presentness, and political revolution. Find a place where you can sit comfortably, perhaps resting your hands on your knees. You may wish to sit on the floor with your legs crossed. Or, if you're not too tired, you may like to lie down on your back. Whatever position suits you. Make sure that your chest is open, and you may wish to allow your eyes to gently close, or find a point in the room where you can rest your focus. Begin by noticing your breathing. Feel your chest rising and falling notice also that society can be thought of as being made up of groups of people with conflicting and irreconcilable economic interests, which we call classes. You don't have to change society in this moment. This is your moment, your time. Just notice class conflict and be aware of it. This will be our anchor as we proceed on this journey. And now, let's take 3 deep, relaxing breaths. As you release the air in your lungs, you may wish to repeat in your mind the topics of today's meditation. And with each breath, I invite you to experience a doubling of your relaxation. Let's take the first of these 3 breaths. Now, breathing in peace and out. Very good. Breathing normally in between, becoming even more relaxed with each breath. Let's take the second breath. Now. In presentness and release. Fantastic job. Aware of your chest rising and falling. Let's take the third and final breath. Now, breathing in political revolution and out. Well done. Don't worry if your breathing doesn't match the sound of my voice. It is all good, and it is all okay. Just becoming even more aware of breath, and beginning slowly to relax. As we breathed those 3 relaxing breaths, you may have noticed a slight tingling sensation spreading from the top of your head down through your shoulders, arms, chest, right out the tips of your toes. This sensation is available to you throughout this meditation, whenever you desire. Don't be distressed or upset if you become distracted by thoughts or sounds in the room. Just keep coming back to breath. The world can be chaotic, and we can lose focus when we think about what we might like to change, or something we wish we could control. But just invite yourself to come back to breath and the model of class conflict. Breathing in and out. As you sink deeper and deeper into this relaxed state of awareness, you may begin to notice the position of your body, the surfaces you are in contact with, the temperature of the room. And you may also notice your body's position in the system of global capitalism. And the air continues to flow, becoming even more relaxed, even more aware. this relaxed state, we are ready to consider the revolution. As you breathe in and out, receive an invitation to the idea that revolution will look different for you if you are in a bourgeois nation enriched by global capitalism than it might for someone in a country impoverished by it. Returning always to breath and class conflict. When we think about revolution, we may imagine it as destructive or violent. We may conjure images of past revolutions that we think fell short, or make jokes about sending landlords and capitalists to violent ends. We may shy away from this image, whether because we are liberals rather than socialists, or because we were raised in liberal capitalist societies that maintain a hold on our thoughts, or perhaps out of compassion and love for our fellow human beings, whoever they may be. Whatever the reason, we may desire to avoid revolution, but simply agitate for reform within capitalist society while maintaining its comforts. But although revolution means a break with the old ways of doing things, it need not be fundamentally destructive, but instead an act of creation. It may be scary or painful, like bringing a new child into the world, but it is the birthing of a new way of life, rather than the gradual managing of decay and bargaining with entropy that liberal democracy has become. This is not to say that we cannot learn from our mistakes or come to an understanding of history. Simply that in considering the revolution, we want our focus to be on the present and not our anxieties about the past. Do not judge yourself if you have doubts. Simply observe them and let them go. We may become anxious or depressed when we ruminate on the past and witness the destruction and pain that can seem to surround us. We can be upset by the wickedness of others and wonder how it is that human beings can have done so many awful things to each other or the planet. Conversely, we may rejoice at small changes that we have managed to win in the past through elections and trade unions in the struggle for a fairer world. But the past is not real and exists only in our memories, in the present, where breath and class conflict remain, and where we want our focus to be. Breathing in, peace, and out. Each breath deepening your relaxation and your awareness. When we are not dwelling on the past, we often project our thoughts about revolution into the future, as if it will be some messianic event, waiting just out of reach, that will save us from the frightening things in our world. future also does not exist. It is only anticipation in the present moment. When we think of the revolution as a specific event, like an armed uprising that will take place in the future, we can become concerned about whether our actions take us closer to our idea of that event or farther away. We may become fixated on the purity of our vision, focusing only on the ideal, classless future, and neglecting other forms of oppression that others struggle against in the here and now. Or we may become anxious, thinking that it is an impossible task, or that we would have nothing to contribute, imagining instead that the future revolution will be led by anti-fascist catgirls or revolutionary daddies who will do the fighting for us. This can turn us against each other, or make us doubt ourselves, wondering whether what we or those around us are doing is truly revolutionary or merely reform. It is okay to have these doubts. Simply recognize them and return to the present moment, to breath, and the desire to abolish the class system. By noticing and letting go of doubts, and not judging ourselves or others for having them, we become prepared to take and wield power in the present, to neither retreat into ruminating on how we have been hurt in the past by the current political system, nor project our desire for change onto imaginary future heroes, but instead, in the present moment, to realize the energy inside of ourselves that we can use to lead the revolution now. Breathing in presentness and out. When we look at the revolution either as a distant project of the future or the redemption of the past, we often imagine it as a moral crusade, springing from the best impulses of our hearts, and someday bringing about a lasting justice. But this way of thinking can also bind us and stop us from seeing a way forward in the present. It is easy to become overwhelmed or disappointed when our own sense of justice is not met, and to become concerned with how the resources of our world are distributed, rather than the conditions under which they are extracted and produced. We stray from the present and class conflict, and it is easy to conflate our moral desire for a better world with the ideals of participation in bourgeois democracies in which we are raised. That is not to say that we must abandon our moral ideals or close our hearts to democratic participation or the suffering of others, or that our smaller efforts to make the world a better place are necessarily a misuse of our time. It is merely to appreciate that a revolution is more than a change in the distribution of goods, or a struggle to get a slightly fairer deal. It is the struggle to abolish the causes of that injustice, not merely its symptoms political revolution. And out. Aware of your chest, your belly, that tingling sensation in your head, shoulders, chest, and down through your legs. You may become aware that you are holding tension in your neck, or your jaw, or cognitive tension brought about by trying to reconcile the internal contradictions of capitalism. With your next breath, just invite any tense muscles to let go. In a moment, we will count backwards from 5 and gradually return to our normal awareness. But first, take a moment to suspend yourself in this relaxed state, as if deep in an ocean. The waves sway overhead, but you are still and calm. And now we will begin to surface with 5 short phrases. You may wish to repeat them in your mind or out loud, whatever is best for you. Beginning with 5. I am aware of my breath. 4. I am aware of my body, becoming more aware with each breath. 3. I am aware of class conflict, breathing in and out with 2. I am aware of the revolutionary energy inside me. And now, finally, 1. I embrace revolution in the present moment. Fantastic job. If you wish, you can stay in this relaxed state for as long as you desire. Or you may wish to continue your day renewed with this energy. Just remember to allow your awareness to always return to breath and the present moment, and the desire to abolish the class system. This meditation was written and performed by Oliver Thorne and recorded with the help of Manbros Media. Patreon.com/philosophytube is where you can support the show and find a list of the generous patrons who make it possible.
We've only gotten through the first 3 articles, but there's a ton more. I'm Andy. Welcome, everybody. I'm the national organizer for Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and I'm here in our beautiful Minneapolis headquarters office. And this is the third installment of our Red Theory study series, which is based on the Fight Back News articles written by Comrade Jay Sykes, who is on this call as well. We've only gotten through the first 3 articles, but there's a ton more on Fight Back News, and there's a ton in the works as well. So I think if anyone is just thirsting for more Marxism, you can definitely, read ahead and, to prepare yourself for when we eventually get to those for these calls. And my co-host is Chrisley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chrisley. I am in Tampa, Florida, and I am in the standing committee of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. I'm also the student commission chair for those of you who are students or might be helping start up student work in the future. So,
thanks, Chrisley.
Thank you.
So and I also, before we start, and I'll remind folks about this at the end, but we really want to encourage everyone who's participating in these, maybe tomorrow, and definitely for the next one, like a couple days before the next session, invite people that you might think would be interested in these study sessions. Make sure to retweet the posts that we post on the official accounts for it, just to help spread this out and get more people involved. So invite people to the next one, but also tomorrow, if you like this session, make a tweet that tags us and says, Red Theory on Theory and Practice was so great, you should join the next one. Ryan, sure. Yeah, promote it, whatever. Share that link that's frso.org/posts/red-theory. All right, and welcome to the person who just joined. We're just getting started, and our topic today is how we learn theory and practice. This is a super important piece of theory and Marxist understanding that we literally use on a daily basis in our work, in our mass work, in our political work. This is our kind of like the introduction to our bread and butter. So going to okay. So the article that we studied for this session starts with a quote by Stalin, who's right here above me. And he said that theory is the experience of the working class movement in all countries taken in its general aspect. But what does that mean? Sounds very all-encompassing and certainly correct, but let's break it down. So we have to think about how we learn. We want to learn ourselves, and we want the masses of people to learn, and we want activists that we're working with to learn and grow as revolutionaries. But how do we do that? So one way is to read, to learn through books, articles, videos, study sessions like this one. But the main way that we learn is through experience. And also, as a side note, the stuff that we learn from books and articles and whatever ultimately comes from the author's experience or from direct experience that they took from another book or another author. Ultimately, the primary source of knowledge is the real world and learning about it through practice. So we define experience as observation and participation in the world, particularly in the production or the fulfillment of our material needs. And if you think about it, most people are going to know a whole lot about what they do every day. In particular, the kind of work they do or how they meet their daily needs. And we want to also extend that to social practice, like activism. The same is true. If you've never led a march or demonstration before, if you've never organized a meeting, the first time you do it might be a little rough because you haven't had that experience yet. And you can read articles and whatever to try to prepare yourself, but we all find ourselves in different circumstances depending on where we are and who we're relating to. And so the best way to learn and really sharpen our practice is to get out there and actually do it. We take a lot of our thinking on this topic from a really excellent essay that Mao wrote called On Practice. And he breaks down the stages of learning something and developing theory into a number of stages. So first is just basic sense perception, just observing the world around us. And then from perception, we move and we form conceptual knowledge. We observe that certain things or people or systems relate to each other in certain ways. And we can form judgments and inferences or assumptions based on those observations. And then we take that conceptual knowledge and we act on it. We act on those judgments and inferences, and we see how it goes in the real world. A more colloquial way to put this is, first you fuck around, and then you find out. This is the Marxist theory of knowledge. And then the crucial next step, we don't want to just do things and just keep doing the same thing over and over again without reflecting on it. So an important thing after we do any kind of political action, whether it's a meeting or a protest or whatever, we want to step back and reflect and be critical of how things went and sum up our experiences. What went good, what went bad. And this lets us reflect on our practice and refine our theory, maybe adjust our theory. And I think all of this is summed up really nicely in a quote from Mao that's in the article. If you want to know a certain thing or a certain class of things directly, you must personally participate in the practical struggle to change reality, to change that thing or class of things, for only thus can you come into contact with them as phenomena. Only through personal participation in the practical struggle to change reality can you uncover the essence of that thing or class of things and comprehend them. Mao also said this another way that's a little more poetic, which is, to know the taste of the pear, you must change the pear by eating it. If you want to know the theory and methods of revolution, you must take part in revolution. So we kind of sum this whole concept up with the slogan or phrase, practice, theory, practice. So we first engage with the world, acting and making observations. Then we step back and sum up our experience and draw lessons from that. And we adjust our theory to take it back out and engage in practice once more. So this is basically, in a nutshell, the Marxist theory of knowledge. There's social practice. We develop theories about that, We test our theory in practice, draw conclusions, and then improve the theory again, and then take it back out. So it's a constant cycle. And a lot of times when Marxists talk about this, we kind of visualize this as an upward spiral. Like our progress towards revolution and the progress of our knowledge isn't this kind of constant increase, but rather cycles of theory and practice that we hope to, over time, refine. And I'm going to pass it over to Chrisley.
Right. Thank you very much, Andy. So if those are the philosophical underpinnings of kind of how we learn, you know, if we apply that method to the material world, what does that end up looking like, right? Like who is learning how? And we think that it's through class struggle, right? That the groups that people are organized in order to do this learning is through classes. Because of the way society is organized, right? So class struggle in particular is going to have a huge influence on our thinking. And as people go through organizing and meeting people and figuring out, well, is this group, you know, like why do they have this particular political view? We always have to think of class interest and kind of root ourselves in that. Each class develops class consciousness through class struggle, kind of using the same laws that you know, Andy just laid out, right? It's through that kind of development of the productive forces and then the relations that kind of hold those productive forces, you know, that bind them all together. That was how the bourgeoisie learned how much they could exploit the working class, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure as they were starting to do it, they learned, wow, I can make lots of money having all of these people doing these tedious little tasks all lined up together. And then the more that they did it, and the more we, you know, all of the people engaged in this mode of production, the more they learned how to do it and how much kind of like more they could exploit, what better technology they could produce. It was through the doing of that. And then kind of the converse is true, is that the working class through the class struggle will know, you know, kind of like how, like what place they really have in society, right? So it's through a strike that workers learn that, you know, if they say no to working on the job, there's nothing their employers can actually do about it. They have the power to actually lose the company money and to potentially gain a win. You know, there's going to be other factors that come into play as well. It's not in a vacuum, right? But it's through the action of actually taking up that organizing and saying something that you know whether or not you can actually win at that point in time, right? So all the principles of practice theory practice that were laid out. You know, and it can't be understated the importance of class and class struggle in this question because, you know, Marx put it really well, saying that class struggle is the motive force of all history, you know, how people can obtain food, like who has the ability to produce and distribute it, who can, you know, kind of like how people can obtain the things they need. Those things are a thorough line across human development, right? So class consciousness grounds our perspective and shapes our ideology, right? We're not trying to have just the correct ideas for the sake of having kind of what we think are the most scientific and correct ideas. It's with the perspective of particular class and with the aim of understanding, you know, like kind of the future of that class, right? Understanding that the working class is the class of the future and the bourgeoisie is the ruling class, which will soon belong in the past. They've got built-in crises that are going to ruin society. So we kind of go into looking for this ideology with that class perspective. And in order to actually change and be successful in kind of getting the revolution, you know, in order to build this revolution, we do need the masses of working and oppressed people to become class consciousness, or to become class conscious. Until that point, you know, the masses perspective, you know, we don't live in a vacuum. The ruling class has the ability to reinforce and summate everything that happens using media, culture, education, news, kind of everything that we read, everything that's produced and sold is written because they're in charge with their point of view in mind. And we need to replace that with the point of view of the working class. And in order to do that, we need to get the oppressed people and working class to be conscious of themselves as a class, right? If you have a movement where there is a lot of like for instance, a movement against police crimes, and people are very conscious about that at that point in time. People are having an uprising. They're learning a lot about what they can and can't do without conscious intervention by revolutionaries to kind of analyze the class forces and, kind of study with anyone and discuss with anyone why things are happening the way they are. It will be the bourgeoisie who sums it up, right? And we've seen them after 2020. They've definitely attempted to do that, saying, oh, it was just a few bad cops, and then when they couldn't get away with that, saying, okay, well, we're going to do police reform, we're going to teach methods of de-escalation, and they're trying to kind of sum things up, and we need to replace that force. The working class needs to replace that role, and essentially, kind of through guiding this class struggle, through summating and having this class analysis, this class consciousness, we want to actually fuse all the revolutionary theory that we're talking about with the working class movement and the oppressed nationality movements, and to break free of capitalist ideas, right? We're going to have class struggle like manifesting in different ways across society, national oppression manifesting in different ways, and we need to actually be able to be organizing with people in order to kind of have them understand on a deeper level why this is happening. There's going to be an advanced section of the masses too, who are the most dedicated fighters, the most active, Mao would call them the most advanced, and we need to get them to embrace revolutionary theory and fuse the theory with the advanced section of the working class. This is actually what we call fusion, and is, in our view, a condition for whether or not we actually have a party in the United States, right? Like, is there actually a group that is taking Marxist-Leninist theory and bringing it to the advanced section of the masses? And that's actually why we don't call ourselves a party. We don't think that there is one in the U.S. at this time, so it needs to get built, right? And it's, without understanding that it doesn't exist yet, you can't actually build one, because how are you going to know kind of what the lay of the land is, right? So, this takes us into, kind of understanding ourselves as materialists and what exactly that means, right? It's not like Madonna's Material Girl song, just wanting lots of money and you only care about cars or something. It's a term that actually says that our analysis starts from what exists in the material world, right, in the real concrete world of that we can perceive, right, and that we can actually access through, kind of that first stage of knowledge Mao referred to, kind of basic sense perception, and that means that the practice that is happening out in the real world is the starting point for all the ideas and all the summation that happens along the way, right? We don't start with the ideas first and then want it to end in the realm of ideas, because that would make us idealists, which is, kind of the opposite, the philosophical opposite of materialists. We believe that the truth needs to be sought first in the social practice of all people. We can take that knowledge and then bring it to a higher level and analyze it and figure out how they connect. And then we have to bring it back down to be practiced in the real world. It comes from the experiences of the people. It has to go back to the experiences of the people. So when we say materialists, that's what we're saying, is that the primary is kind of what you do out in the real world, right? And that it's worthless if you don't take it back out into the world of the masses to make a new reality, to take this knowledge to a higher level. Kind of the highest example of, kind of how we would view things different from idealists is, so ourselves and some other idealists like anarchists, we want communism, right? So you could say we want the same thing. We want a society without classes. But we don't have the idealist view that we can just say that we've abolished it and get a lot of people to agree that we've abolished it, and that would actually make it abolished. We'd have to start with what is happening in the concrete material world, with the productive forces, and that you actually need the material conditions to make communism a reality, which will require all these changes first, right? And those have to come first before we can say that we've achieved a society without classes. So everything from the dictatorship of the proletariat to a totally new economy and new relations of production to taking care of things like poverty and scarcity. Those are the conditions that we want to build out in the real world. And, we think that we have a science, Marxism-Leninism, that can make that a reality, right? So it's not just ideas, and it's not meant to stay in the realm of ideas. It's supposed to be, it's something we can actually achieve, even if it sounds really lofty, like, a society without classes. Like, what does that look like? Well, we don't know what that will look like yet, because we haven't even come close to kind of what that means materially, right? It's actually why we say that we're socialists right now, because we're communists and we're socialists. We understand that to have communism, you need to build for a socialist revolution. It's having the workers and oppressed movements in charge is what will take us there. So this kind of brings us back to the quote that Stalin said, by saying that he had stated that revolutionary theory is the experience of the working class movement in all countries taken in its general aspect. It's through the particular experience of fighting in that movement, through the experiences kind of gained throughout the class struggle and the summating of that struggle, the whole collective experience of the people, that is essentially, like the revolutionary ideas that we have stem from that. Like, we wouldn't have that science without that collective experience first. And that means that we can take what we analyze, bring it out into the world, and actually, elevate it to a higher level by doing it, right? This is the experience of Marxist-Leninists all over the world. They're going through the same thing that we're going through in different stages of advancement, right? Like what we have in the U.S., quite different from what they have in Cuba so far. But we're trying, and it's through the practical gathering, or it's through the gathering of this practical experience, through the struggle, that we're able to have something to analyze in the first place, right? So whether it's kind of things that we've seen in the past that we can learn from, like the establishing of dictatorships of the proletariat, or new things that we're watching develop, like, kind of socialist countries becoming environmentally friendly in the midst of climate crisis. Like, this is through the doing and the engaging and trying to change that socialist countries are learning a lot, right? Making mistakes and then kind of making advancements. These are all experiences that we kind of stand on the shoulders of and we share. We all face different conditions in different places, but by sharing and studying experiences, we can draw general lessons from the practice and theory of communists all over the world and in history. And that's what we mean, and that's what Mao means when he says from the general to the particular, from particular to the general, is that we have to start with the facts of the class struggle. We have to analyze it with revolutionary theory and proletarian ideology through that lens. We have to bring it back out among the people where it can be tested out and made into reality. And unless we do that, these ideas are not going to do much good. So that's essentially kind of the crux of this study and this article, and kind of the philosophical underpinnings of what we want to ask people to do, right? So that's it for my part of the presentation. Andy, should we open it up to the floor for questions and comments?
Yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to, say a few other things. Are the cadre members of Freedom Road Socialist Organization, this theory, and we'll get kind of more in depth, specifically how we apply this in the next session, which is on the mass line, and is basically like how to take this idea of practice, theory, practice, and directly apply it to political organizing. I also wanted to point out that this is reflected in our organizational structure. So all cadre members of FRSO belong to what's called a unit, and that's a group of members that engage in a particular area of mass work. And so what that enables us to do is have daily, weekly experiences, like these practical practice experiences that we're talking about, and then come together as a small collective and sum those things up. And that how that is broken down. For Chris Lee just posted a link, and so Theodora, so for general members everywhere, even in cities where there is a district of Freedom Road, it's not a requirement to be engaged in mass work. The only requirements for general members are to agree to our program and pay the annual nominal dues. But if you are interested in joining at the cadre level, even if you're not in an area where there is a active FRSO district right now, we are undergoing a project right now of doing a lot of field organizing, of sending leading comrades from across the country out to different cities, typically where we have a number of general members that have expressed interest. So Theodora, to answer your question, we will reach out to you going forward, and not all of this stuff, it doesn't happen all at once. This is something that we build over time. But for anyone who is interested in becoming a cadre member and and getting to know like the responsibilities and rights that come with that, essentially the foundational thing is being engaged in mass work and doing that collectively with the other members of that organization in your area. So usually we don't start up districts with just one person. We would want a couple at least to begin building and meeting together. So we can talk more about that. We'll be in touch, Theodora, and also Rashad. I'll take down both of your names as folks to reach out to. But we just wanted to make that more of a clear point, because we've been realizing the more we interact with general members that it's not super clear on our website that when you sign up, when you fill out that form to be a general member of FRSO, that there is this other level of membership with a higher level of commitment. And the reason for that is because traditionally, the way that we've recruited comrades is through meeting them in activist organizing. That's, until a couple of years ago, we didn't even have this form on our website for people to, express interest in our group. But we're in a time of rapid expansion. And we don't expect everyone who joins as a general member to, have the capacity or interest of, becoming a more active activist and organizer. But we do want to make it clear that is, that is an option, and that we can have, we will we're actively providing support to places that want to organize more in their local area. Okay, great. So we'll move on to like Q&A about the reading and about the discussion, that the kind of presentation that we just had. So again, like last time, if you feel like you know these concepts pretty well, we want to make sure that people that are on this call that haven't read this, that, and the other thing have a space to ask even basic level questions, because we want to bring everyone up to a higher level of understanding. That being said, if you have a kind of more detailed question, you can certainly ask that, but we want to prioritize people that may not be as confident in the in their knowledge of these things, so that we can kind of break everything down. And we also want to prioritize people of oppressed nationalities and genders to speak up as well, because we know just kind of the default dynamics in society. A lot of groups will call this progressive stack. We like to call it socialist stack, as a funny little turn of phrase. But so that's my little speech, and we'll take hands for questions now. All right, Kay, I am gonna unmute you.
I'm just gonna type mine because I feel weird talking.
Okay, sure.
Okay, go.
All right, so Kay's question is, do you think that socialism in other parts of the world can't succeed due to U.S. intervention, which would mean the U.S. socialist movement will need to happen first to prevent the constant overthrow of legitimate socialist leaders in other countries? I've seen resources stating movements need to happen everywhere simultaneously, but how does U.S. imperialism affect the other movements? Chrisley, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, totally. So that was actually something similar was said as the Soviet Union was having the revolution, right? I believe that kind of probably maybe the main writer for it was Leon Trotsky, but he argued that what they had happening couldn't possibly be a socialist revolution because Britain and France and more developed countries would have to have it first. But I mean, we just had a presentation about how social practice is actually kind of like the start of truth, right? They did it, and they kind of proved that it was actually possible. And if you hear the phrase socialism in one country, it's kind of the counter slogan to the permanent revolution idea, which is that you actually can break those links. And Lenin actually, we talked about it on our last study a little bit, but Lenin, in analyzing imperialism and seeing that there were countries that were underdeveloped in the world, actually saw that far from being further behind when it comes to revolution necessarily, those weak links to imperialism actually was a way that, it actually gave them an advantage, because the links of imperialism were in some ways weaker. There would actually be kind of more factors that in some cases led the people to rebel more, right? Or become more conscious about the Yankees walking around in my country, or, you don't belong here, you have to do a little more work to show a Filipino that, their own elected official is betraying them. But when you have Americans stepping right on the soil who can't even speak the language, but they're in charge, it's a little more obvious. So, but that said, it would actually be a really big boon to other movements around the world for us to get closer to having a revolution. We would have we would be able to, the ruling class in the U.S., would have to deal with us simultaneously as there are efforts in all these other countries, So the best thing that we can do is fight for revolution in the U.S. as internationalists, right, while promoting these struggles abroad. That's what people in other countries, we talk to parties across the world all the time. That is definitely what they want us to do, So no, your country does not, is not necessarily doomed to never have a revolution until the U.S. has one first, but also it would help a really great deal for us to have a revolution in the U.S. We would be able to play a pretty helpful role.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it's one big reason why we devote most of our energy to organizing and building revolution here in the U.S., but we also dedicate a significant amount of time to doing international solidarity. Some of the most significant international solidarity that our group has directly participated in is solidarity with Colombia, Palestine, Central America, the Philippines. Absolutely, we're internationalists. I would also like to point out that U.S.-led imperialism is this global system, and not only would a revolution in the U.S. help get the U.S. military's boot off of the necks of other countries, but conversely, when a revolution happens in some other part of the world and some country breaks out of the orbit of imperialism or puts up a struggle, even if they don't establish socialism, even if they just make trouble for the imperialists and deal blows against them, that helps our struggle as well, because it weakens our common enemy, which is U.S. imperialism. So we're internationalists, and we have solidarity, not strictly because it's some nice principle, but because we have a common enemy, which is the U.S. imperialist ruling class. And I think Chrisley very nicely summarized the reason that simultaneous revolution is a very idealist concept because of what we refer to as uneven development. Every country develops at different rates. They're at different levels of development. The conditions in the U.S. are very different than those in the Philippines. And so, simultaneous revolution is kind of like a real idealist Trotskyist concept that, just isn't going to happen in the real world. But we definitely support revolutions all over. And like in Vietnam, the primary people that defeated U.S. imperialism there were the Vietnamese. But the U.S. anti-war movement helped them out as well by causing unrest, by becoming ungovernable in the U.S., so that at a certain point they were getting beaten in the war, and they were worried about civil unrest back at home. So our solidarity is meaningful to the people in oppressed countries around the world, and they also help us out. So we've got, do we have another question? Okay, Eric, I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, I'm going to try and keep it concise, but what Chrisley brought up a while ago about the concept of fusion, this is a revolutionary strategy that's actually older than the existence of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. This grew up from the party building movement among Marxist-Leninists in the 1970s, and the opposing concept was that we will develop, the people whose thought we opposed thought that you could sort of develop theory in a vacuum,
without practice, right? And they were like, their argument was like, we're gonna get our theory correct first, which will then enable us to come to the masses of people with a fully developed program, right? And that was the opposing view. But back before Freedom Road existed, one of the component parts of Freedom Road was a group called Revolutionary Workers Headquarters. And Revolutionary Workers Headquarters were big proponents of fusion, and they said that's absolutely wrong. There's the only way that you can develop theory is to being involved in the living day-to-day struggles of our class and the oppressed. That's the only way to develop theory, because we take what we have gotten from the world communist movement in terms of theory, and we try to apply it in our own national context here, and then on the basis of whether or not the way we've interpreted that theory, whether or not it has success or failure, we draw lessons from this, we have the summation, and then we develop theory on that basis, right? So the idea of fusion is that we bring this Marxism-Leninism along with the summation of our practice of applying Marxism-Leninism to our conditions, and then we evaluate it on that basis and then develop theory from that, right? So this is, even though some of the Revolutionary Workers Headquarters takes on certain issues were wrong back then, we were the organization that survived because we were able to apply Marxism-Leninism as a living analytical science. So I really unite with what Chrisley said. She described it absolutely perfectly.
Okay, so DD asked, why do y'all think we don't have a party in the U.S.? What separates FRSO from other socialist orgs besides the Trotskyist parties in the U.S.? So we, what our concept and our definition of a communist party is, and this is you know, the definition that Marx used and the definition that Lenin used, but that a real communist party is a vanguard or the advanced leading detachment of the organized working class. So if you call yourself a party, like for instance the Communist Party USA, but you don't lead a significant section of the working class, we don't consider you to be a communist party. Like we think that you know, having leadership over a significant section of the working class in the U.S. Is an essential condition or criteria for determining whether a particular organization is a communist party, you know, wherever it is. But we're in the U.S., so we're thinking about the U.S. I would say something that sets Freedom Road apart from other socialist organizations would be our perspective on this, and that we have an active strategy that we are pursuing to make that happen. That idea of fusing Marxism with the workers' movement, with the working class movement, is an essential part of our strategy. And another part that is essential that some groups, including groups that call themselves Marxist-Leninist, also don't approach correctly in our view, is the what we call the strategic alliance. So seeing that there is a fundamental confluence of interests between the multinational working class movement and the movements for national liberation, that they have the same enemy in the monopoly capitalist class, and that in our practical work, we don't just say it would be nice if the workers movement and the Black liberation movement or the Chicano liberation movement, it would be nice if they worked together. That would be really great. we every single day actually try to build that unity. We have comrades working in all of those movements, and actually comrades who are in places leading those movements, and they think with everything they do, our comrades who work, who lead police crimes work in Chicago, fighting for community control of the police, fighting against police murders, mostly working in African American communities. They think about how they can support strikes that go on in the city, and they also go to the working class movement and the unions, and they get their support. And in fact, the union and working class organization support was a big thing that helped our comrades get the progressive legislation that passed in Chicago. It wouldn't have been done without union support. So these, another way is our comrade in Chicago when, I'm talking about Chicago a lot because that's where I was for a number of years. So that's what I know the most about, but this, we approach this the same way all over the place. I saw comrades of ours that work in the Palestinian movement actively embodying solidarity with the Black Liberation Movement at every step of the way. So I think to sum up, the things that set us apart are, really having a real revolutionary strategy and working every day to actually put it into practice rather than leaving it in the realm of ideas. Our approach to the national question and national liberation, and also our orientation towards the working class. There are some groups that almost exclusively recruit college students. We more than half of our members our cadre members are involved directly in union workplaces. It's a huge area of our work. So we see ourselves as the Marxist-Leninist organization in the U.S. that has a strategy and is working effectively to put it into practice. Chris Lee.
Yeah, and when we say have a plan, we're quite serious. It's not just kind of like the principle of get any union job, any working class job, like that by itself is great. No, we tell the students who graduated, if you want to go into labor, you go work at UPS and you join the Teamsters, and you do it as a group, right? Like there is a plan that has been, that we've come up with through the social practice of being in different unions, right? And we say like our primary plan, and some cities have kind of like multiple things going on, but as far as like a national main concentration, we tell people Teamsters, right? So we're taking all of these students and kind of very consciously trying to build a party with everyone recruit. Yeah, so just wanted to kind of get that. So if people are looking for a job and want to organize in labor for the FRSO, get that job.
Yeah, and so I'm seeing some questions in the chat. So Kyle said, what are some notable examples of theories that failed in practice? We have this, this one that we've mentioned previously of the Trotskyist simultaneous revolution everywhere. Trotsky basically said the Soviet Union is definitely going to collapse. This was a couple years after the revolution. And Trotsky said, we're definitely going to collapse if there's not communist revolution all over Europe within the next few years. And that did not occur. The revolution, the incipient revolution in Germany was crushed. Soviet Union was left to fend for itself, but they persisted and they kept going. I would say, in my personal past experience, I was part of another Marxist organization, there were some points of political agreement, like supporting socialist countries, and the importance of doing activism, but the approach was very different. This was a group that did not study the mass line and did not have this perspective that, in order to create correct theory, we have to, first be among the masses, see what is going on, what do people need and want, how do we interpret that with Marxist theory, formulate a plan of action, and then go back among the masses and, fight for change. This was a group that very much thought that they had all the politics already worked out. And so I saw a repeated pattern of activity where some political crisis would occur, such as the Occupy Wall Street movement, or the big bank bailouts in the 2009 financial crisis, or the immigrant rights crisis. And every single time, because they thought they already had the great theory, every single time their approach was to create a new mass organization, and have comrades hold protests with that new mass organization that none of the masses were a member of, by the way, and intervene in the struggle this way. And it, there was a couple times where, you'd get some people out to a protest, you'd meet a few new people, but ultimately none of those organizations were sustainable. They were just kind of like little front organization after front organization. And in my experience, that organization didn't really learn much from that practice, and they also didn't change a whole lot. So I think that's like kind of my personal experience with like what happens if you're trying to be a communist and you don't do this stuff. Chrisley, do you have anything to say about failed theories?
Yeah, I can think of one, and maybe this is a bit of a spicy take, but we're scientists. Syndicalism and the IWW's project, International Workers of the World, they had a project of creating a big unified socialist, anti-capitalist union, and they did a lot in order to kind of unionize a lot of the United States in its early history. I'm not, we understand that multiple things can be true at the same time, or they could make a lot of advances in this way, but be wrong when it comes to the fundamental question. Syndicalism basically means that by having just like kind of workers organizations, or just kind of like for some they think it's like agrarian, like a commune, and just connect all these communes together, you'll have socialism. And the IWW tried that and it failed, right? In the end, you still had a lot of big unions that the bourgeoisie, was making sure that they kind of, yes, the unions would form out of the spontaneous kind of worker struggle that, that people like kind of organized out of necessity. But, like we were saying earlier in the study, without the active leadership of revolutionaries, the bourgeoisie will still take over, right? And they made sure to get a lot of the union leaders kind of collaborating with them. And if the socialists are not in those unions where everyone else is, if they're trying to form their own kind of socialist only or leftist only unions, then the mainstream unions where all the workers are will still be controlled by the bourgeoisie, right? There will be no one to challenge the leadership of those groups. So that was the summation. I don't know if anyone's read William Z. Foster, kind of one of the leaders of the CPUSA, who did a lot to help give us the theory that we have now for building a revolution in the US. He actually viewed that as an error, was taking all the socialists out of the mainstream unions so that, maybe they had this nice union that was anti-capitalist, but all the workers were still joining the other ones. So I think it's more complicated than that, because there was the question of the first industrial unions and the communists actually getting kicked out of a lot of the unions. So I'm simplifying it a lot. But the fact that a lot of people today still think that that's the strategy, like, oh yeah, well, the Teamsters has some corrupt leadership, so we shouldn't go in there, we should form our own union. We just see in practice that was wrong. Communists need to be where the masses are. So that's kind of an example of something that we still see today, which is kind of interesting. We as Marxist-Leninists get called the dinosaurs, but I consider that kind of more of a dinosaur, idea that somehow is not yet dead. So.
So I'm gonna briefly address Sam's question and then speak to Rashad's question about patriotic socialism. So Sam wrote, what plans or tactics can we use to fight not only capitalism but also revisionism? And what do we do to avoid tailism or commandism when working with these other groups? I would say regarding revisionism, we do think revisionism is a danger, but our perspective on what revisionism might be a little different than what most people who are using that term, are thinking. So it's pretty common for groups identifying themselves as Marxist-Leninist Maoist to see a revisionist error made by the leadership of a socialist country, and then kind of paint the whole project with the brush of revisionism, and say, for example, Cuba's allowing some more small businesses. They're giving out more small business permits. This is revisionism, and the whole government of Cuba is revisionist, and we don't support that. So they kind of take this very hard line that we think is a bit idealist. If you go back to the roots of what revisionism means, it means to go back and revise the basic tenets of Marxism. This is a danger. This is always a danger for revolutionary groups. It's kind of a form of oftentimes opportunism. The Soviet Union had a problem with revisionism when they amended their constitution to call their state the state of the whole people, rather than a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's kind of, going back and kind of changing what this project is about. So we do think it's a danger, but we don't really, for instance, we don't paint the whole project of socialist China as revisionist, for instance. With regard to your question about tailism or commandism, so for people that might not be familiar with these terms, tailism would be you're working in a mass organization, and instead of advancing what you think would be the best course of action, you just kind of go with what everyone is saying or with what everyone thinks is a good idea. And so you're allowing the revolutionary group to be led by the masses or certain elements within the masses. And then commandism, it would be kind of an opposite phenomena of, we're the communists in this mass group. We know everything, and what we say goes, and you're going to do this, this, and this. And I think these are both kind of very complex issues. I would say in mass organizations, the general ways that we try to avoid these things is to have real democratic processes in the mass organizations. So we might in our internal meetings, we might discuss what we would like to happen in a mass organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's how it's going to go. I think also it's important for us to remember that a lot of times we're working in a united front, around a particular struggle. Again, I'm going to reference my experience in Chicago, fighting for steps toward community control of the police. We recognized that we aren't the whole movement. We can provide important leadership and we can make contributions with our time and our efforts. I absolutely, our comrades made big contributions to that struggle, but at the same time, it is a united front. You're working with people that you don't necessarily agree with. We were working with abolitionists. We were working with members of the city council who are absolutely 100% liberals. But in that struggle, we were united in a united front towards a common end. And I think that reminding yourself of that can help, avoiding these errors in mass work of tailing behind the movement or trying to command it. So we're going to move to the spicy topic of patriotic socialism. This trend, the patriotic socialism thing, it's not a new phenomena, but it's kind of regaining a lot of currency nowadays online, particularly. A lot of the times, when somebody that we go out and meet around the country or talk to, this is a little thing Tom does. If somebody asks him about patriotic socialism, he'll usually ask, "Have you ever met anyone in the real world who thinks that?" So far, he's had one person who's met a Pat Sock in real life. But our basic orientation towards it is that it's a reactionary trend in the socialist movement. We don't think that there's anything progressive about the current character of the United States or anything progressive about the U.S. flag. This is a flag of genocide and imperialism that we're trying to tear down. I would say that, we, the way that we, oppose it is by trying to actively support and build the, both international solidarity, but also the movements of nationally oppressed people in the U.S. And making that a center of our program and our mass work. We haven't yet got into direct polemic with any of the patriotic socialists, coming from the organization. I think probably because we don't view them as that important or significant of a trend that, has real influence outside of the internet. Typically we generally polemicize, sparingly in the current period. I know in the 60s and 70s, comrades did that a lot more. But I see that Eric wanted to speak about patriotic socialism. So I'm going to unmute you, Eric.
Thanks, Comrade Andy. Yeah, it really is fascism, because one of the main fault lines in U.S. imperialist monopoly capitalism is the fact that this is a white settler country, not to draw from Sakai or anything, but it's a white settler society that oppresses whole nations and peoples. And we have to, one of the things that's at the core of Freedom Road's politics is that we recognize the fact that whole nations and peoples are oppressed by the white oppressor nation, right? There's the black nation in the U.S. Southeast, which Harry Hayward called the Black Belt, the Chicano nation in the Southwest, indigenous nations, external colonies like Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and these so-called patriotic socialists, which I call another name for patriotic socialism is National Socialism, right? Nazism, right? Slurs over all those contradictions and unites with the monopoly capitalist conception of this as one nation under God. It is not one nation. It's many nations that are kept oppressed by a white oppressor nation. This is at the core of our politics. And these people actually exist in real life. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to hide behind this sort of conception of them being some type of socialists to win people over to actual fascism. I've had experience with this in my own union. I've been fired by the Chicago Transit Authority as a bus operator for my union activity, but I still remain active in ATU Local 308 241. There's an oppositional caucus that I've been trying to build over there called the Chicago Transit Justice Coalition. The Justice Coalition just had a demonstration at the Orange Line by Midway a couple weeks ago. And some of these so-called patriotic socialists showed up and tried to give us fake support for this. Now, this is a union that's like 70% black, man. This is the wrong place for these knuckleheads to stick their fucking noses into, right? And so this one black worker who I'm very close with, who I collaborated with closely in trying to build this organization, asked my opinion of this organization. I told him, I'm like, man, anytime these knuckleheads come around, throw them the fuck out of there, man, because they are not here to try to build our interests, especially with this union being majority black workers, right? These people are fascists. They are 100% fascist. Caleb Muppin, aka the Muppet, who founded this organization, went to Russia to meet specifically with fascists, so-called Eurasianists, that were supported by Russian fascist Alexander Dugin. These are people, and now they're trying to model their organization again along the lines of Lyndon LaRouche's organization, who was a domestic fascist here, who physically attacked CPUSA meetings and collaborated with the FBI secret police in the 70s. This is a big danger to us, and we have to, in any place we find them, whether or not it's in material, whether or not it's in reality here or on the internet, they have to be opposed all the time because they are racist and they are National Socialists.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Chris Lee.
Yeah, so I want to say, I don't think we should actually focus on them that much, because I don't think that they, if people have met any, it sounds like some have unfortunately come to your union, and we can smash those ideas with what we already know, right? We don't have to create a new strategy just for them. We can actually carry out the current strategy that we have, which is, if people stick with us, you'll learn about the details of that united front we want to build between the multinational working class and the oppressed nations, where we want to make sure that whatever working class movement we build fights against white chauvinism and has a view that is positive towards national liberation, right? Like, that's the link that we're trying to build, that Marxists before us have been trying to build. So I think that in doing that, we'll isolate whatever kind of American exceptionalists or patriotic socialists, we kind of interact with. But I agree with Andy that from what we've seen so far, kind of in our practice, it is mostly like a very loud online thing that doesn't make sense to people when you talk to them IRL, right? Now, the thing that I do want to say is that we are trying to build an American Communist Party, right? We want to build the future CPUSA that has not abandoned Marxism-Leninism. We want to build that group. We think that the history of the American people is a proud history of struggles of different peoples, right? but starting with the kind of like the poorest farmers who like kind of had nowhere to live and then came to the U.S. I'm not saying that it was right what they did. Like, the formation of this country was a settler colonial project that killed everyone who was there before, but it was a project formed by the American colonists that had charters who worked for royalty, right? So that starting ruling class and those for the most part, the majority of the farmers and the immigrants who came over to the U.S. did not go on to become the future Wall Street. They were the future proletariat, right? You went from like a peasant farming potatoes to like working in a factory. That's the course for a lot of these people. And because of that, because we have like such a shared enemy, we can link up all of these movements, and we want to have that united Communist Party in the U.S. that can bring these social movements together. Why? Because if they're not brought in together, they will oppose each other, right? We'll have contradictions that won't be resolved non-antagonistically. They'll be resolved with like racism and kind of these and not just between white people and like African Americans, for instance, but also between different oppressed nationalities. If you're an oppressed nationality, if we've got all kinds of ways that racist ideas will manifest, and that's kind of also why we're not just like nationalists of different like nations or whatever. Like, it's not just about one your own personal nation or whatever. It's about kind of this united people's movement, right? So that, I would say, is the one thing that we have in common with the patriotic socialists, is that we do want to speak on behalf of American workers, but everything else about what they say is wrong. And I think the fact too that they're so interested in the conservative movement is very troubling. So I definitely agree with that. I don't think we should focus on them that much, though, because we need to focus on uniting the advanced forces who can be united. I don't think that kind of going at other socialists is really going to be a good use of our time.
Kay, did you have? So this will be the last question. Was your question that about if FRSO has been active in the Amazon movement? Okay. No, we have not been active in the Amazon union movement, primarily because our strategy, and because we have fewer resources than larger like actual trade union organizations, our labor strategy focuses primarily on recruiting or sending in cadre into unions that already exist, rather than sending cadre into unorganized workplaces. This is not because we think it's unimportant to organize new areas. We do think that is important, but we think that we as communists can make the most difference by joining existing unions and making them fighting to make them fight, as what we say, fighting to make these unions that exist class struggle unions. But we absolutely support the Amazon movement. We support unions everywhere. Love unions, except for that one in Poland in the 80s. That's a little history joke there. Yeah, Chrisley?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that the main way we relate to the Amazon movement is, we have a lot of comrades who are the Teamsters and who played a good role in trying to make sure that the opposite, the slate that was going against the class collaborationist slate won. you know, in large part, in small part to our organizing for the election, but in large part to our organizing during the contract campaign. And the Teamsters can organize Amazon. In fact, it's actually in their interest to organize Amazon because Amazon pays its drivers like half as much. So if the Teamsters will organize Amazon, then not only will the UPS drivers not have to worry about their pay getting cut in half because of this, this like underpaid section bring everything down, but also the Amazon workers will get paid more, So that's kind of, it's a big demand that our folks push in the